Greetings and salutations and welcome back to Colin's Last Stand right here on YouTube. My name is Colin Moriarty. First and foremost, as always, I want to thank you for being here with me today and taking a little bit of time out of your day to enjoy an all-new episode of Colin's Last Stand. Now, today's episode focuses on really two things, two shows actually, television shows, believe it or not, that have been recently announced. One is called Confederate on HBO, the other is called Black America on Amazon. Both of them deal with alternate history timelines stemming from the American Civil War in the 1860s. One seems to tell a more harrowing story, while one maybe seems to tell a more uplifting story. We don't really know anything about them yet. At the end of the day, what I really want you to walk away from with this is not necessarily about two shows, about information about two shows that sound really good. Both of them sound really great, actually. But about the argument of authoritarianism versus the freedom of expression and the freedom to create. Because believe it or not, since both of these shows stem from an identical conflict and then go in their own separate ways, there's a group of people that think one should exist and one shouldn't. Why? Because of people's precious sensibilities. And that's just not a good enough reason for me for fiction not to exist. In fact, fiction of all types, of all ilks, stuff I like, stuff I don't like, stuff of good taste, stuff of bad taste, that should all exist. And that's what this episode of Colin's Last Stand is ultimately all about. So let's jump on in. The first thing you have to understand about Confederate is that no one has any clue what it's actually going to be about. All we know about the show comes from 82 words HBO released about it. No more, no less. Here's what HBO released. Quote, Confederate chronicles events leading to the Third American Civil War. It takes place in an alternate timeline where the southern states have successfully seceded from the Union, giving rise to a nation in which slavery remains legal and has evolved into a modern institution. The story follows a broad swath of characters on both sides of the Mason-Dixon demilitarized zone. Freedom fighters, slave hunters, politicians, abolitionists, journalists, the executives of a slave-holding conglomerate, and the families of the people in their thrall, end quote. I read that and I got stoked, not only as a huge fan of alternate history, but as a fan of dystopian fiction. That brief write-up creates a ton of tantalizing questions and answers virtually nothing. Now, there's nothing terribly unique about this setup, of course, more on that in a minute, but I immediately started asking myself about some of this stuff as a fan of this type of fiction, and just good fiction generally. A third Civil War? When did the second one occur in this timeline? How did the South resist Union advances? A DMZ in between North and South? Sounds like they're trying to draw parallels to Korea or Vietnam. I was especially intrigued by the slave-holding conglomerate. What would that look like? How would that function? Who would the main characters be? Where precisely would it take place? Would the story be about the ultimate triumph of black society or something far darker? I can't wait to see what they come up with. But then the professional outrage came, and as these people usually do, they destroyed the excitement with a potent concoction fueled by the primary ingredient of self-importance. A show about the South winning, or at least surviving the Civil War and slavery still being legal? Don't you know that there's still racism in the real world? We can't have fiction with racism in it. We can't have fiction with slavery in it. We can't tell a story so dramatically different from actual reality that it bears no resemblance whatsoever to 21st century America, because this somehow reinforces racism in the real world, or something completely insane like that. Now, most people with a brain in their head know that the what would have happened if the South won the Civil War approach is, with the possible exception of the what would have happened if the Nazis won World War II approach, probably the single most used plot nucleus in the entire alternate history genre. So for anyone that's not outraged by profession, Confederate wouldn't exactly strike you as strange. But if it did strike you as strange, as it struck the chronically offended so clearly, allow me to welcome you to the genre you clearly didn't know existed. See, we as humans have this bizarre need to look back into our history and wonder what if, and we're strangely obsessed with destruction, pain, and agony in our fiction. None of this is new. There was literally a best-selling book released last year called Underground Airlines with a nearly identical premise. I guess the professionally outraged don't have time to read books though. How else would they try to censor fiction on Twitter? Just wait how outraged they'll be when they find out about Underground Airlines. And wait until you find out how bad the outrage gets when they find out the book was written by a white man. So this is where the problem begins to erupt with Confederate, because the professionally outraged, this very small minority on social media who likes to speak for everyone or pretend they speak for everyone, well, they won't have it. They don't want Confederate to exist. This causes HBO to release a statement apologizing for rolling it out the way they did and whatever else, because probably the sane minds at HBO who have been working on the show for some time looked at it and realized, well, this doesn't sound that insane to us. This sounds like pretty good fiction, speculative alternate history fiction, just like a bunch of other alternate history. Oh, but we forgot about the really chronically offended people on Twitter, and now we have to talk to them. Also, forget about the entire reality that two of the people behind the show are two of the people behind Game of Thrones, the HBO beloved, critically acclaimed, award-winning series. Forget about that. Oh, also forget about the fact that two of the writers of the show are black. No big deal. I quickly found myself deflated after reading about Confederate. Excitement quickly turned to disgust, not because of the plot. The plot sounds awesome, but because there are so many people out there that think so highly of themselves that they believe their personal feelings on fiction should dictate what we are and aren't allowed to consume. Better yet, when they're called out on their blatant attempts at censorship, at their blatant attempts at shaming HBO into canceling the project, they pretend that they're not trying to censor anything, that they're not trying to get HBO to do anything at all, that they're merely trying to express their opinion, with the hashtag #NoConfederate. I spent too much time in the video game industry to not know this brand of nonsense when I see it, led by a small pack of regressives who think their feelings are so important, they should dictate the course for all of us, no matter what. I, for one, tend to debate the content of things, not their actual right to exist for others. But I suppose that's just me. No one seemed all that upset when Jericho detonated 23 nuclear bombs around the United States. But then again, the show takes place in modern America, so we probably had it coming. When Man in the High Castle, itself a show dealing with tons of racism, gave us an alternate history timeline in which Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan win World War II and then subjugate the world to their power, including the United States, the biggest concerns were surrounding advertisements, not the show itself. But who cares if the Nazis won, right? The Nazis were nothing compared to America's lengthy slavery era that you'd have to be 155 years old to have been an infant during. Harry Turtledove has written so much supposedly offensive alternate history that it would make your head spin. But those are books. Who reads books? Certainly not the people upset about Confederate, who somehow missed the aforementioned Underground Airlines about modern-day American slavery written by a white person with a strangely similar plot. Then you realize this hullabaloo, like all other hullabaloos, are all about egos and self-righteousness and not about much else. It's about authoritarianism, about control, about virtue signaling, and about this bizarre sense of neo-purity that would be funny if it wasn't so sad. It's not about the freedom to enjoy challenging fiction or to choose not to consume things you don't like. It's about shutting it down for everyone in the name of some mystical and unseen force that suggests that, hey, if HBO doesn't make this show, it'll somehow be a victory for society. And if you can't shut it down, you shame people. You call them names. You pretend they're bad or wrong or immoral for enjoying it, or even reading into it, or even defending its right to exist. I honestly cannot believe we've gotten to the point where we have to debate whether fiction has the right to exist or not. Not without ridicule or criticism, of course, but just at all. Ladies and gentlemen, people actually celebrate this sort of stuff. There are people out there that love seeing works of fiction, art in essence, shut down. It's a victory for them. It's no longer about vibrant marketplaces of ideas, about fiction that brings us to worlds, timelines, and locales we could otherwise never experience, some amazing, some dire, some uplifting, and some outright terrible. It's about sterility, sameness, political correctness. I mean, you're scared of a show that depicts modern-day slavery in the United States? It's fiction. You know what I'm scared of? People who try to shut down shows about modern-day slavery in the United States because they're the new fringe Christian right, and they don't seem to realize it yet. So originally when I came up with the episode idea to do something about Confederate, this is where it was going to end because there was not much more to say, but the internet moves pretty quickly because Amazon announced a new show called Black America that also derives itself, in a sense, from the American Civil War, but takes a different spin. The professionally aggrieved about Confederate? Well, they're not aggrieved anymore. They have no problem with stories being told from the Civil War, as long as they're stories told like Black America. Like HBO's Confederate, Amazon's Black America sounds absolutely amazing. According to Deadline Hollywood, Black America, quote, envisions an alternate history where newly freed African Americans have secured the southern states of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama post-Reconstruction as reparations for slavery, and with that land, the freedom to shape their own destiny. The sovereign nation they formed, New Colonia, has had a tumultuous and sometimes violent relationship with its looming big neighbor, both ally and foe, the United States. The past 150 years have been witness to military incursions, assassinations, regime change, coups, etc. Today, after 2 decades of peace with the US and unprecedented growth, an ascendant new colonia joins the ranks of major industrialized nations on the world stage as America slides into rapid decline. Inexorably tied together, the fate of the two nations, indivisible, hangs in the balance. End quote. Where HBO gave us 82 words of description, Amazon gives us 124, and the show sounds awesome. Like Confederate, I'll be all over Black America. And like with Confederate, reading about Black America brought up a ton of tantalizing questions about its lore. Why were those 3 states in particular singled out as reparation payment? Did the Civil War and Reconstruction otherwise go similarly to the actual timeline? What sort of government does New Colonia have? Can only Black people live there? Why is the US declining? I mean, this sounds great, but like Confederate, we don't really know anything about it. We have a paragraph of information to work with, and that's it. When it came to Confederate, slavery, the Civil War, and all the rest were far too sensitive to touch. All of it somehow reinforced current-day racism, or so the claims go. But according to the same exact people who were dying on their crosses about Confederate, Black America is a victory, because this equally fictitious world deals with a victorious Union in the Civil War, and with the great American farce that will never ever happen, but that we still for some reason talk about endlessly, slave reparations. The Civil War isn't okay to talk about in one alternate history timeline, but in this alternate history timeline, by all means, America is declining, we might as well talk about it. We can all vicariously experience the reparations pipe dream and have an uplifting message otherwise, I guess. We ultimately have no idea what either show is really about, who it centers on, and how their stories will progress. But what we do know is that they deal with stunningly identical subject matter, and only one is okay, because we mustn't offend anyone's precious sensibilities. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Paint it with whatever brush you want, using whatever color you'd like, but consider this a spade being called a spade. People are dictating to you, to all of us, and to the powers that be behind these shows, that we don't need or want something like Confederate, but we need or want something like Black America. My argument is way simpler. I say we need both. We need as much fiction as possible, as many storytellers telling their stories as we can muster. We need the good, the bad, the positive, and the negative. We need the hopeful, the scary, the safe, and the dangerous. And no one, not one single person, has the right to deem fictional subject matter unfit for anyone. Because then you run into blatantly, demonstrably hypocritical situations like Confederate versus Black America. Unlike the Civil War, this is a fight that never even had to happen in the first place. But you can't expect adult-like behavior from professionally offended children. See, the big thing here for me is that it suggests that Black people can't deal with memories of racism or memories of slavery or memories of the Civil War of the 19th century and before that, or even of Jim Crow and Reconstruction in really terrible times for Black America. Because let's be honest, racism still exists in the United States, and we have a really, really terrible history of racism in the United States. Fiction, whether it exists or not, is not going to erase that reality. But what this sort of thing does, in my opinion, is tells the rest of society that Black society is just too sensitive for this. And I just don't believe that that's true. I believe that a vast majority of Black people, who most of whom have a head on their shoulders just like anyone else, looks at this kind of outrage and thinks it's stupid. And I bet that there are plenty of Black people that think that both of these shows, Black America and Confederate, sound really awesome. This isn't real. Confederate isn't real. Black America isn't real. These are works of fiction. If you can't deal with a work of fiction, you have way bigger fish to fry than arguing on Twitter and Facebook and all these places about HBO and Amazon shows, with all due respect. And let's stop pretending that people crying out about shows like Confederate don't want to shut the whole thing down. Yes, they do. The hashtag was called No Confederate. No Confederate. Pretty obvious what their intention was. So let's not pretend that everyone's just saying, I'm just trying to say my opinion on this. No, you're not. You're not just trying to say your opinion on it. You're trying to shut it down. Criticism of fiction should never call into question the right of that piece of fiction to exist. And it should never call into question the character of the person who consumes that fiction. You're reading way too much into situations when you do stuff like that. I say let fiction be fiction because it's not the real world. And that's the beauty of it. All right, that's it for me for this episode of Colin's Last Stand. Remember, Colin's Last Stand remains fully ad-free and independent. No baked-in ads, no ads even running on YouTube, because of the support of good people at patreon.com/ColinsLastStand. So for $1, $2, $5, $10 or more a month, you can support the show, and you can also get special perks, which people really seem to enjoy. So please do consider, if you like the show, going over there and showing your support. And yes, just to preempt the inevitable questions about it, I will do episodes about Black America and about Confederate as we learn more about them, because they fit very well into Colin's Last Stand's kind of ecosystem. And I know a lot of people are just as interested in the shows as I am. So keep an eye out for that. When the time comes, we're looking at 2018, 2019 or whatever for these shows. So they're a long ways away, but I hope CLS still exists at that point and we can talk about them. All right. I will see you next time for Colin's Last Stand. Thank you for your time. I hope you and yours are doing very well. Be good and keep on learning.